Hi, I'm Emz, on Deck and Wings, and in this video I'll be taking a look at Erntemann from Konflikt'47. Going to be painting him up, and I'll probably have a little chat about who he is and some of the inspiration behind him as well. So yeah, it's a really cool model. This retails for about £15, but you can get it a little bit cheaper in other retailers. This war dolly is cast in resin, and it's pretty straightforward to put together. It's a really nice sculpt, so I'm going to go ahead and start painting him up. So I'm starting off with the mechanical legs, as a lot of metallic stuff is on this miniature. I've got DeadSnow multi-metal steel here. If you want to get a similar effect, you can mix some black with some silver paint. I'm trying to create as much contrast as I can, because I find with true metallic metals you don't always have as much contrast as you want to with it. I'm starting off with the darker colours first, and then we can build up some layers afterwards. So the Erntemann, or the Harvester, or Albrecht von Zogling, sorry if I'm pronouncing that wrong. So he's a mad scientist within the Axis powers, which are like formerly Third Reich and its allies, and obviously they have ties to like experimentations with people. But there's more of an emphasis on the weird science side of things with Konflikt'47. I'm just putting on some black wash, non-oil type of stuff now. Sorry if it's not great to see on the camera, but we're working with some very dark colours at the moment. So the Erntemann is into the Green Vaults, which is like a bit of a cult kind of Cthulhu type of thing within Konflikt'47. And they harness the Rift energy. So he uses the Rift and also the experimentations he's been working on to reanimate the dead, because there are zombies within Konflikt'47 and the Axis powers utilise those. Moving on with pewter now from DeadSnow molten metal. You can use whatever other brighter silver you want to if you're using this video for inspiration. Okay, so I'm utilising the edge of my brush, and this can make edge highlighting and just highlighting miniatures in general easier. And then just go back and forth on the edges. And then I'm just picking out a few little areas and adding some highlights there. Like I said, I'm going to try and maximize the contrast between the dark and the light. A little tip when you're painting your miniatures is to test the paint type before you actually put it on them. So it's a good idea to like dab it off on some tissue paper or on the back of your nail or your hand. I've added a little bit of like a thinning medium to this. I tend to add thinning mediums when it comes to metallic paints rather than water, but that's up to personal preference. Also, excuse my nails, I've always got paint on them when I'm in the middle of doing a project like this. I work on multiple things at once. And you can see the contrast building up now between that light and dark, like I said. Going back to what I said about the weird science side of things, this guy does remind me a lot of the movie Reanimator. This is based on the Herbert West Reanimator by H.P. Lovecraft, which appeared in the Weird Fiction magazines. And like I said, I do find a lot of the Konflikt'47 stuff leans into this weird science fiction, B-movie type of vibe. And it's more satirical, I would say, than Trench Crusade, as I find some of my friends do sort of compare them until they know a bit more about Konflikt'47. Less is more when it comes to things like this. So don't be afraid to make mistakes. I find too much with miniature painters, they're afraid to make mistakes and be a bit unneat, and that can hold you back as a creative, I find. And just keep going around the miniature, adding some highlights here and there. If you really wanted to save some time, you could dry brush some of the areas instead. But I just wanted to take my time with this one. Right, so this is how it looks now. And I could go back over, and you can go back over as well, and kind of push some of the darker areas back in if you want to, so you could get some black paint with a bit of silver or just some black paint thinned down, and just go back over into the recesses and such forth. So I could add some further highlights to this, but I'm going to leave it as it is because I think it looks pretty cool, so I have some nice contrast to it. Moving on to his clothing, he has a white lab coat and then like an underneath uniform. So I've got a deep grey from the army painter here. Personally, I like to paint white with a blue-grey foundation to it, and I also like to highlight black areas with this type of colour. So this is going over his lab coat and his uniform area. It's not super exciting, this bit, but it all has to be done. We need to do the awkward parts to get to the good parts. I think why Konflikt'47 resonates with me quite a bit and why I like the Axis army is that weird sci-fi horror B-movie vibe to it, because I am really into my films like that. The Axis and the Third Reich stuff does remind me of a movie called Overlord, and that is a alternate history science fiction horror movie with weird experimentations and such forth in it. I highly recommend it if you're into that type of thing. So next up is Bright Sapphire from the Army Painter. So if you want some inspiration from this, just grab like a light blue or a light blue-grey type of colour. Painting isn't an exact science. You don't have to completely follow the exact same colours that somebody else uses in tutorials and such forth. So I'm just adding some of this. So I've thinned it down a bit with some medium thinner. And then I'm just going over the miniature. So I'm still leaving some of that previous colour showing through. So I'm going to add some more highlights to this. So I'm mixing that bright sapphire with some matte white. So I've thinned this paint down slightly, and as I've said before, dab the excess off on some tissue paper and test the consistency out on the back of your thumbnail. Sorry, the camera's more in focus this time around. So, as I said, try it on the back of your nail just to see the consistency of it and make sure it's not too thick or too thin. You have more control that way, because the thing is, when you thin your paints down, they're more watery, so they're more likely to just go all over your model if you've got too much on your brush. And I'm trying to keep some of those previous colours and layers showing through as well to create some contrast. And I'm trying to hit the edges of the model and like the top half where the light might bounce off it. So another movie with a Konflikt'47, especially Axis 5, is the DeadSnow movies. There's 2 of those out, and they're about like Third Reich zombies coming back to life, and that's after, experimentations and things like that. And they're a fun watch, especially the second one when the Soviets come into it as well. It's very like Konflikt'47 coded, and I love alternate history stuff. So I'm just gradually building up the highlights and just adding some bits here and there. A lot of things with it comes to painting is just practice and brush control. It doesn't matter how expensive the gear is that you use. And there's the lab coat finished off. I'm going to leave his uniform in that deep grey colour, and I'm leaving his boots because I used a shiny primer, so they make his boots look shiny anyway. There's a lot more on this miniature than I realised when I started painting it, so I'm moving on to the skin tone. So I've got topaz skin from the Army Painter here. Bugman's Glow or something like that would be perfect in this situation. So I've done the topaz painted areas off camera, and then I'm mixing some topaz skin with barbarian flesh together. So if you have a similar like brighter Caucasian skin tone, just mix that in with a reddish skin tone colour. You can test out the consistency of your paint on the back of your nail, and then you can dab off excess, like I said, on some tissue paper or a cloth. And especially when it comes to skin tones, I like the paints being a little bit thinner, so you have a bit better consistencies with them. And this stuff's awesome as well. It's called Flow Aid Medium. This can make your paints thinner, but also makes it flow off the brush much easier, and this really helps when you're painting very small areas. I can't emphasize enough how important brush control is. It doesn't matter, like I said, how expensive the gear is and your brushes and everything like that. You need to have the practice and patience. And the thing with brush control, especially if you're painting small areas and trying to thin your paints down, if you've got too much on your brush, it'll just go everywhere and it's harder to control. So you need to dab that excess off, and then you can test it on the back of your nail or on a piece of paper to see how thin that paint is or how it flows. So I'm going over where that topaz skin was, and I've got that mix of topaz and barbarian flesh. So I'm still leaving some of that topaz colour showing through, but I'm trying to add some highlights with this new colour. So I'm being quite precise with this. I'm sorry if the camera is a bit blurry. I'm trying to get it more into focus, but you get the idea. You can still see that previous colour showing through. And a bit on his face as well. So you need to highlight like the cheeks and the forehead, and you want to leave some of that previous colour showing through. Making some further highlights now. So we have barbarian flesh and Dora skin. So yeah, we're going to be mixing these together. Once again, dabbing the excess off and testing it on the back of my nail. I'm focusing on the knuckles and just some small parts of the arm. Still keeping the previous colours showing through. When you're adding more highlights, make sure that you cover less areas the brighter the colour is which you're switching to. So if you're adding some new colours which are brighter, less areas covered. When I'm doing paler skin tones or Caucasian, I like to do Gilliman's Flash. I'm basically adding some more shadows back into the miniature to emphasize certain areas. So again, brush control, make sure you've not got too much on your brush. I've thinned this down a bit. I love using contrast paints instead of just straight up washes. And I'm putting them in between where his knuckles are. And then you can just add a little bit underneath where his eyes are and like around the nose and places like that, just to kind of emphasize those areas. And that's his skin done. So it isn't an exact tutorial, but I wanted to try and give you as many hints as I could along the way. And this can help you with your painting in general as well. So we have some nice contrasts here with some darker tones, some mid-tones, and some lighter tones. So if you think you're brave enough to do the eyes, get some off-white paint. And then use the side of your brush. You don't want the paint to be watery, just add a little bit of thinner and dab off the excess, and then use the side of your brush to make a mark where the eye will be. It doesn't matter too much if you mess it up. You should just go back over with some darker tones. So like I said, that Gilliman Flesh Wash, you could add that back in to the eye socket around it. And you can add a dot for the pupil. That's if you want to be brave enough with that. Doesn't matter if you mess it up a bit, you can just try again. It's all about practice. So just a small amount on a brush. Do not want it to be watery. There are a few satchels and things on this miniature, so just grab some brown paints. I've got oak brown from the army painter here. Another fun movie I wanted to mention is Trench 11. This is set in World War I, not World War II. And it's kind of like a really weird horror science fiction Cthulhu-y, kind of like The Thing type of movie. I love gas masks, so yeah, it's my cup of tea. I really enjoy highlighting leather stuff, so I've got ionic brown and dark ochre here. I've mixed it with some of that skin from Army Painter. I also got my Flow Aid additive here. This stuff is fantastic. Like I said, if you're painting very small areas, it makes it come off your brush, and it's different to like Lamium Medium and Medium Thinner. It's a slightly different kind of chemical formula. As far as I know, don't quote me on that, but it does act differently. Like I said, it makes the paint come off your brush easier, as well as thinning your paints down. So some very small areas here, like I said, wick the excess off, and then you can always test it on the back of your nail. And then I'm adding some like scratches and things like that. So it basically to make it look like one leather type of effect. I really like painting leather areas on miniatures. So if you want to highlight brown, I do recommend looking into using some of your flesh tone colours. Rather than like adding white or like a more desaturated brown, if you add a flesh tone, it gives it a really lovely saturated contrast for your highlights. Don't forget to use your brush to your advantage as well. So use like the edge of your brush to add some highlights, because there'll be raised areas on your miniature which it will catch. Moving on, there are some wires and things dangling off this guy, so Got Basilisk Red from the Army Painter, so just grab whatever dark red colour like corn red that you have if you're getting some inspiration. So there's a surprising number of like alternate history horror movies set during World War II. And I guess it being with that era of time, with it being so kind of tragic and so many things going on and so many different horrors of war, I always find like horror movies are like a way for people to kind of process things as well. Moving on to add some highlights. So we have pure red from the Army Painter, so any bright red type of colour will do. We can test this out a bit, like I said, back of our nail just to see it, and I'm just thinning this down quite a bit more. So I'm still keeping some of that previous colour showing through, just adding a few pops of the red colour. And if you're still watching, thank you. This model is a lot more intricate than you think at first, but I wanted to do a good job of it. I didn't want just a basic paint job, I wanted to make it like Tabletop Plus. So there's a last bit here. I've got Rainforest Green from the Army Painter, but if you get any sort of glowing green colour you might have. And then there's a little bit where his eye is, so he's got like this eye patchy thing, as well as little bolts here at the front. I'm just adding a pop of colour here to these. So in the description below, I'll put a list of some good alternate history, horror, kind of sci-fi World War II films, which you might like if you're into Konflikt 47. So that's my guy finished. For the base, I'm just going to leave that and paint it off camera. I just added some texture paste, and I cut up some of the resin supports the miniature came with to make it look like rubble. As always, thank you for watching. All my social media links are in the description below. Remember to enjoy hobbies for yourself, and at the end of the day, they're just one noise. I hope you enjoyed my waffling, and I will catch you in the next video.